Hey team, welcome to You Are Not Alone, the work edition. So what we're hoping here with this is to give you a monthly conversation of a lot of the topics that you're going to experience in your work and sometimes even in your personal life. Why we've said that this is You Are Not Alone is because so much of what we can do in the leadership space, the team space, we have those moments of like, am I going crazy? Is this just am I the only one experiencing this? And this is the opportunity to spend 30 minutes with us each month over new topics and just find out how not alone you are. And providing that is myself. My name is Joshua Morlock. You will be spending the time with me as I dig into this with Emily. Looking back at my experiences, I have worked over 10 plus years in the HR field and 15 plus years in the leadership space, navigating all kinds of different environments. And I am excited to bring an experience that is tailored and nuanced to these conversations and the lived experiences that I have.
And then I'm his co-host, Emily Walton, and I'm very excited to be diving into this. I have 10 years of experience in recruitment marketing and HR tech, and then I'm a certified executive leadership coach, and I'm really passionate about leadership. And Joshua and I just sat down and started having coffee chats, and we realized that these conversations were so valuable to unpack that we wanted to bring that to a wider audience, and we're excited to do that. So today's topic is leadership loneliness.
It is. And that inherent loneliness that comes with leadership, both what I would say, Emily, is explicit and assumed. And I have found in my roles that the assumed leadership has its own weight of loneliness.
Can you give some context behind that of like how that plays out?
Absolutely. So I think back to I had one of my roles, and I don't want to name any companies, but one of my roles, I found myself working with a leader who they had a great level of execution skill, but not a lot of leadership experience. And so a lot of the tasks were given and they could execute it well. But when it came to the delegation, when it came to the communication, a lot of the planning pieces that involved multiple people, there was almost an expectation that, okay, Joshua has a lot of experience in this. So he can maybe start to work those pieces where I have that weakness. Typically, that's great if that conversation happens, beforehand, right? But what I saw was happening was a deliverable would come into expectation, and then there would be this vacuum, this radio silence, right? And we would have to go, okay, like now that we have the expectation, now that we understand the result, how are we going to put all these pieces together? And in that vacuum, just a natural, like, okay, I've seen this before. So, hey, will you handle this? I'll handle this, take care of this. We're going to, in about 2 days, let's meet back up. Let's have a conversation around it. Let's see where our roadblocks are. And then we would produce a result collaboratively and then take it back to our leader. And they're like, oh, excellent. Good job. Like, you did it. And I was just like, okay, over time, you started to see that, okay, what happened first was there was a vacuum, someone had to fill it. What happened over time was less there was a vacuum and more, hey, we need to get this done. I want you to work with the team and handle it. The challenge was my role didn't change from what it was already existing as. So there was this implied leadership attached to my experience and my ability to work with the team. Now, what I mean by there is a loneliness that I believe is attached in that is it is difficult or was difficult in that time to go to a peer, right, who now the relationship has changed, right, over time. So peer has evolved into almost a different word, right? It's hard to name that word, but it's different now. And so who do you vent to when what once was venting sideways now almost has a hint of a vertical, right? And you never vent downwards, right?
Yep.
So who do you express that frustration to? And then what if it's an interdepartmental relationship? And what does that look like when you're like, hey, I just got hit with a ton of extra responsibility. I'm practically helping lead the team. Like, then it almost looks kind of, it loses a sense of camaraderie with another team member, and more of a, look what I'm doing. Like, look at my comeuppance, and you have a certain sensitivity to that, and suddenly you're like, okay, I'm just kind of existing in this space, this weird nebulous space. And then there's also when you're having to execute the decisions, but you're in no way part of the decision making process, you feel like you're on an island and you're just waiting for someone to arrive with something so that you can disseminate it, right? But you don't get to, not to say that that decision making makes you, more important, but like to be able to say, hey, if I'm actually going to be part of a high level process with this, I don't have any input into it. So I just have to sit in this space and wait for news, right? And then I have to take action. So there's this disconnect. It just, like I said, you kind of sit there in your space waiting for the next thing.
And am I hearing it correctly that in this instance, this was more like an informal leadership sort of role, not as if they moved you into a leadership role and you had a boss to speak to? It was more like, we know Joshua could do it, or I'm just using you. I don't know who this applies to, but we know Joshua could do this, so let's put it on Joshua. But now Joshua is somewhat elevated in responsibility to
Uh-huh.
those of his peers, but he doesn't have a peer like at another level. Or if you go to your boss in that sense and you're like, well, I'm doing more, that also carries a weight to it.
Right.
So
You're 100% right. It is an informal leadership. Nothing in the org chart changed. The hierarchy didn't change. Again, assumed or inferred leadership, right?
yeah,
But what happens is the expectation, right? The failure also now weighs on you, right? So there is this hint of, man, there is consequence that is not matched by reward.
yeah,
And so you'll carry that and you'll know to yourself, okay, I need this to be successful, but I actually have no authority and no weight behind my words with the team. The only thing I'm able to quasi lead with is influence, right? And not that I believe that a title should be the thing that carries all of your power, right? I think that makes you an ineffective and almost a lame duck leader. But when it's only influence you have, there's no level of like, hey, random name Charlie just like is literally just not even listening because they know at the end of the day what I'm trying to get across to them. There's no consequence in them not listening to me, right?
yeah,
And you escalate it and you go to the leader that kind of gave you that, and you go, hey, like these are the struggles that I'm having with this. Well, they're going to come in and go, hey, like what would be you've got to tease out the next result, right? What would be that outcome where they go into that person and be like, hey, Charlie, you got to listen to Joshua. And they're going to be like, he's not my boss.
right. Why would I?
You're my boss. Why aren't you telling me to do these things? And then that person looks ineffective. So by putting even someone in that role, the leader loses their own bite, gives this power, if you will. I hate that word, but like gives this kind of authority to the person in that middle role, that liaison role that actually isn't even real. And suddenly you're trying to communicate an expectation that is not matched with accountability. And when you try to get that accountability, you notice the flaw in the system that makes the one that gave it down unable to lead at the right level now too.
I hear about this with a lot of different roles too. So, like your background is in HR. I hear about this with HR business partners where
Mhm.
they have to go and have influence over other departments to try and move things along or develop something, but they don't have any power, if we're going to use that word. And I also hear it with project managers a lot where they're the person that has to come in and coordinate everybody, but no one answers to them. And they really seem to have this challenge of how do I have influence? How do I move people forward? And even in a different sense, we've been talking about informal leadership. I think this leadership loneliness as well, like speaking from my own experience and from experiences of other people that I know where you move into a leadership level and you had really great relationships with your peers.
Mhm.
And then there was already there was a relationship with people in other departments, but they're in a higher level. And then suddenly you move up a level, you're now in line with the kind of relationships you'd built with others, but you're now sort of one level above your friends,
Right.
and you may be leading your friends. And those same people that you used to go to and say, "What do I do?" Or "We got to take a lap. I need to talk about this," or "I just need to vent."
Mhm.
Like you said, venting down, like you can't do that anymore. And it really does create this sort of like gray space or in between purgatory, if you will, of I don't feel like I have the influence and leadership I need to be successful. I'm still held up responsible for these things, and I don't know who to go to help me through this.
And that's really what it is. It kind of distills down that loneliness question kind of hits to that, who do I go to? And I think a lot of, you know, people in our space, especially in like a leadership level space or a people leader space, where do you go? Because again, when you can't go down, you can't vent downward, laterally, it's difficult because then you run into the man, everyone else, like, you got your own problems, Bill. Like we can take a lap, but when are you even going to have time to have that lap? Because it's now especially if you're in an environment that gets very siloed,
Hmm.
then you run into that trouble. And it begs the question, who do you go to?
And
Right.
I would add to that siloed. And also, I've worked personally in a lot of fast paced tech, high
Mhm.
growth environments. And just like you were describing, that, man, I wish I could be there for you, but I have 47 competing priorities due in 12 hours. So it's hard when you're in that position of feeling lonely and wanting support and or resources, and at the same time when you're searching for them, your loneliness is not prioritized because other things are getting the focus.
It's true. Loneliness is not a metric that shows up on the slide deck when you're doing your discovery, your debrief and discovery on a project, right?
Right.
Like, it's like, okay, we met budget, cost was great. It's like we saw that these things were timely, like milestones were hit. Oh man, it says here Chuck was having a hard time with his peers, and he was struggling with a lot of the weight of the responsibility. We'll dive into that a little bit more. And it's just like, no, there's no space for that. No one is, quantifying that loneliness struggle.
One thing I'm wondering is talking a little bit about what can people do when they are experiencing loneliness in a leadership role?
Absolutely. I think for me, it is a pure network. I think siloed is not just a word that you are siloed in your own organization. I think sometimes we believe no one outside the organization even really cares either, right? I have found my best inspiration through there's been two avenues, right? For me, it is joining committees and councils and being part of networking events that are in my area, right? Being able to see other professionals in my role or similar roles and just being able to connect with them, right? I love that because it takes some of the pressure off of I have to say a certain thing when I'm in my own four walls, right? When I'm outside of those four walls, what that does not do is give you a liberty to, just to slander. But what it does do is kind of give you that space of like, if I tell you that there is a random person at work and I'm having this frustration, you're not going to spend the rest of your work day looking around your area going, was he talking about him? Was he talking about him? Was he talking about him? Like, they're going to process that and be like, okay, well, I have no idea who you're talking about. So here's the things that I've done and what I've worked through. Right. I think again, when you use your own four walls, I think sometimes you can create shadows for people to jump at. Right. And I think so by having those kind of networking groups and taking advantage of those events, that's perfect. Now, that being said, there's also those, prototypes that are not going to perform at a high level at a networking event, right? You have great, capable, and strong leaders that have a more introverted nature or a more nature of, I like to be by myself, but you still want to connect, right? Being alone is not the same thing as being lonely. So like you like your own space and your own time, right? So I actually really love avenues like LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is an absolute incredible, for all the faults of the app, right? I think there's a absolute incredible community to be built there. I have a living testimony of that, you know.
That's how we met.
It's how we met. So like it's a system that exists to help you network, you know. You can network from your own couch, from your own home office, from a place where and you're going to be able to see, and what I do love is that the app has changed and evolved in the way that people communicate, and that it's more of that authentic self. It's more of that I am showing you who I am. I'm showing you the struggle. And I think there has not been a day that I haven't been able to log into it and then scroll through and I see somebody go, man, they're experiencing the exact same thing that I am, right? So it and you have the ability to connect with that person and go, hey, like just you posted this, you wrote about this, that really hit home with me. Like that is something that I also experience and see, and so I just really appreciate it. And then those connections can be made, right? And suddenly you're going into work the next day with a little more, I'm not alone, right? Which is the whole point of like what we do here between the two of us is hey, that message of you are not alone, right? That communication that there is nothing you're experiencing, that you are the only person that has ever felt this way. So when I think of when you ask that question, what are some ways that a person can work through that? I think those two immediately jump to my mind. Is there some that you've seen in your experience and working with the clients that you have that you've been able to go, you know what, this is an avenue that you can take?
When I think about this, the first thing I think about is like human need.
Mhm.
So why is loneliness so such an acute impactor in our careers? It's because as humans we are wired for connection. And so when you do feel isolated, that puts you at risk. Like on a psychological level, we're worried about how am I going to get through this and survive and figure this out. Now that's kind of we're taking it to an extreme, but that's on a level what your body's doing. And some of the things that I think about from shared experiences and working with others, one is mentorship, because sometimes you can't go to the people within your organization. If it's an informal kind of role and, it's just awkward to talk to people about it, or if the culture's not healthy and you need external support, finding a mentor, someone who's been there and can offer options and share their experiences helps you feel not alone in that and just someone who can be there for you. Um, I think I got this from High Priestess Brene Brown. There's like a whole shelf back here. But I love her work. I love that it's grounded in research. And I want to say I got this idea from her. I wish I could remember which book, where you take like a 1-inch square piece of paper and you think about like, who is my square squad? Which are the names that go on this, that no matter what I'm facing, I can talk to them. And it might be your best friend from childhood. It might be your mom. It might be a boss you had from 3 companies ago. But sometimes I think too, if we put our hope of connection in just one person like a mentor, then when they're not available, that can also be its own sort of isolation and loneliness. So having sort of a micro Rolodex of the people that have earned the right to hold space with you and support you and hear your story, to me is very important. And it's like, who would you call if you really needed help? And those are some of the names that you'd put on that list. And then, of course, I would say this because of what I do, but I'd also say a coach. But because the number of times that people start coaching with me, and they go, I just don't know what to do. I'm so alone. This is so wild. Because coaching can be like a thought partnership, and it's
Mhm.
someone that you can bounce ideas off of in a neutral space. They can be objective. They can challenge you if maybe you're adding to the narrative and making it more challenging for yourself rather than, well, what if we explored it from this angle? And you realize, oh gosh, that's way less lonely. I could do that. So those would be, I would say, a mentor, a coach, and then the squad of people that are really your closest support network, I would add in addition to yours.
That's perfect. And I do like the idea of a coach. I know we've used them in the past, obviously. And for us, it has been that it helps us know that there is someone out there that we can lean on for that additional support. Sometimes we run into these problems as leaders, right? They're unique problems. And we're just like, how do we even solve this? Is there a way to solve it? And by reaching out and taking those partners like what you do, I think that's an incredible avenue of just going, hey, like, even though the problem exists, there is someone out there that is able to give that assistance. Because when we think about loneliness, I don't think I want to use the expression there's something out there to help you, right? Because I think that exacerbates the loneliness. What I want to really press is that there is someone out there that can help you with that.
I would agree with that because I think there is no substitute. I can't buy enough chocolate bars to make me not feel lonely. But if I spend quality time with someone who's there, who supports me, who hears me, way better than 100 chocolate bars. And I love chocolate. So back to a slightly more serious note. What else do you think is important to discuss around leadership and loneliness?
When I think spending some time in the topic, and I don't mean on the topic, but in the topic, like navigating some of that loneliness, there is a level of burnout that comes with it. And that is why I challenge, or let me rephrase that, maybe less challenge and more urge, our friends, our listeners, the people that we coach, the people that we support, that this burnout, this loneliness, they have some signals. They have some early warning signs, right?
They
So what
do.
I would want us to do is to look for those warning signs, and when they come up, pay attention to it, right? One of the first signals to me that I was starting to experience something like this was I had a moment of frustration. I had a moment of like this doesn't feel good. And then I went to go, like, I was just like, man, I need to let this out. And so I was just like, who am I going to go talk to? So like I stood up, and then I was like, wait, who am I going to go talk to about this? Like, I can't talk to the team, right? Like, I don't want to do it indoors, right? I don't want to do it in these own four walls, right? Maybe it is about someone, and I don't want to discredit or diminish that reputation just because of a snapshot of a moment with me, right? So that was one of the early indicators for me of like the moment I have to ask, who am I even going to talk to about this? I need to find a network. I need to find someone. I need to reach out to someone, even if it can be just like texting a significant other or a partner and just being like, you won't believe the shenanigans that I'm dealing with today, you know?
Sure.
Or even if you don't want to carry that weight into your own home, right? And I know because you can always message a friend and just be like, can you believe what is happening to me at work today? Or even, hey, I hope you have a crazy work story for me because I'm about to unload. So you're asking for that, like, hey, I'm just not expecting you to be an emotional sponge for me. Let's share something, right? But to find those key indicators first. And like I said, for me, one of those early key indicators was I realized that I didn't have anyone to go talk to. I didn't have a check-in partner, and so I needed to establish one. I For me, I think another indicator that I was struggling with loneliness was not just I didn't have anyone to talk to in that moment, but I didn't feel like I had a path. Like I didn't feel like I had a way out of the frustration that I was in. And when you hit that roadblock, you think immediately to yourself, okay, so now it's not even about like, how do I have that? I'm trying to express the story to someone, right? But also, how now do I even realize that I'm in a place that's stagnant? Who even helps me when I feel like I'm stuck in the dilemma? Because again, there can be a level of loneliness that is inherent to where do I go from here? Especially when you see other people around you living your dream, right? Like maybe they're moving up in the company, maybe they're able to get that compensation change, that you don't think will happen for you. Maybe they got a key project that they've been asking for that they got to do. And the thing that you're wanting the most to get off the ground keeps getting hit with, we're not there yet. Now's not the time. No. And then you're like, what am I like? What's going on? So being able to also identify, am I stagnant right now? Am I even not in a place where I feel like I can take this and get out of the situation that I'm in?
Two things come to mind for me on that. One is in that space, also being aware and tuned in to what is sort of your internal dialogue
Mhm.
or monologue. Because in that space, it's very easy to go, gosh, okay, I had this situation and now I'm aggravated and I need to find someone to talk to, but I don't have them right now. And it leaves you in a bit of a funk. And then mentally, you then start going into, gosh, I cannot get anywhere with this. I can't get this project off the ground. Nobody will hear me out on this raise that I'm asking. Nobody cares about me because if they cared about me, they'd give me this raise. And it just can go
Mhm.
further and further, faster and faster. So I think really being able to hear those thoughts and register, are these net negative, net positive? And if they're net negative, like what is the fuel that's burning behind that? Because you need to excavate it in order to dig it out and prevent going full burnout, because it's much easier to start doing that when it starts than 2 years in and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to dig myself out of this hole now. There was one thing that you mentioned earlier that stood out to me was when you, in a leadership position, whether it's formal or informal, have some sort of negative experience and you want to protect the team. And I know there are some leaders I've encountered that that's not their way that they operate. It's, oh, I'm frustrated, I'm going to vent to the team. And that creates its own set of problems. However, in this instance, you're mentioning protecting the team because you don't want them to be jaded by a specific snapshot of a moment, or they have enough on their plates. This is not their responsibility. There are a myriad of reasons for that. But I feel like that also adds an element of loneliness because it's now not only am I carrying the weight of my responsibilities, I'm carrying the emotional burden that this has brought on to me, and I can't bring it to them, and maybe I can't bring it to someone else, because I also know some people will say, I can't take that to my boss because they'll tell me, bring me a solution, not a problem, or I'm not your therapist, or things like that.
Right.
So you feel sort of trapped and then compressed by the weight of it.
Right. Mhm.
And I'm just wondering, are there additional ways to navigate that or think about that?
I think there has to be a level of comfortability with going up, right? I think when you are a leader, you don't get the option again of venting down, period. Like to me, that is a non-negotiable. And again, and that could be something that as I grow and evolve, but to me, that's a non-negotiable.
Do you mind just interjecting a little bit of context as to why? I agree with you, but just for people who don't think that way.
Perfect. For me, the reason why is there's a protected relationship between the leader and those being led. And when you vent downwards, one, I think you erode some trust. There's always going to be this argument of we want to appear human, we want to appear vulnerable to our teams. And that is 100% true. They need to be able to learn to trust you in hard moments because they see you going through hard moments. I think these situations are different. I think when you are frustrated and you take those frustrations downward, right? Again, you create this level of if the person above me comes to you, I've already planted seeds of distrust, right? When you're really trying to, in your position, create a connection for those two, right? And so if you break that connection, you lose the ability for the process to function well, right? And I also think it's not our place in that role to manipulate the relationship between the two. And even if the intention is not to disparage that leader to the team, that is still the outcome, right? And we're trying to battle perceptions, and most of leadership to me has just been battling perceptions, right? Because you'll come into it, or people will come into it and be like, tell you what, at my last job, this is how it happened, right? And so now you're like, okay, well, this hasn't happened historically here, but like we've got to navigate all of that, right? And that's just an example of you battle perception. So you don't want to create perceptions already. right? You don't want to be the person that when they leave your company, they go to the next one and go, that one, this is how it worked. So you don't want to create already that broken or stilted relationship. Second, I believe, wrongly or rightly, that there is sort of an importance of being able to show your team that the situation is under control. There's got to be a level of port in the storm here.
I think of it, it's interesting because we get to the same place, but we get to them differently. Kind of starting with your second point there of like the safe port in the storm. I think we're seeing it, we might be using different words, but kind of
Right.
seeing it similarly is that it's very important to model the behavior you expect for your team. I think because if I fly off the handle whenever something gets under my skin, that then gives my team the right. So they think because they've observed it, we can operate that way too. And that's going to create a whole slew of problems. And it doesn't actually help people learn how to navigate, cope, and develop through these experiences. And my other thought, the reason that I've usually in the past operated where I protect my team from, emotional turmoil or just things that I'm not saying things that like are NDA or things that, aren't I can't share that beneath the level, but just things that was like, this is not going to help is because as a leader, in my mind, it is my job to help develop those who work with me. And I don't, if I'm just venting and blowing off steam at like, not even they're the recipients, but they are hearing my frustrations about the situation. That's not a net positive. That's not helping them grow and
Right.
develop. And so for me, if there were something, and maybe in a one-on-one situation without names, I might say something like, well, I've navigated something like that before. If they bring something to me and say, here are some things to consider, what feels best to you for how to navigate this situation, and then I can use that experience. But I don't want to just unload on them because to me, that doesn't build them up and develop them.
And is the end of the day, isn't that the goal, right?
Right.
Is to develop them. So I think that's 100%. I think you're right. I think we're wanting the same outcome and result. And this is what I love about maybe lived experiences, right? Is because it allows us to name what it is that we're trying to prevent. But I think that's incredible. I think that's a great point, especially like I said, being near and dear to being in development. Is if you're bringing somebody else down, it's also going to be hard at the same time to build somebody else up.
Right. Like, what's the net effect of this?
Hmm?
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing coming to mind at the moment for me is specifically, I've spoken with a lot of people who move from like one of the ranks into a leadership role, and now they're responsible for leading their former peers and oftentimes friends. I've had that experience, and people will say, oh, it's awful. It's so hard. It's so, there's so many challenges. And it is. It's not easy. And I don't want to dismiss that in the slightest. However, I also think we really shy away from difficult conversations for a variety of reasons. We're worried about sparing people's feelings or just any number of things. So when you are going through that transition, I highly, highly, highly recommend having a very candid conversation with the people that you were closest with,
Mhm.
or even just in general. Anytime I took on a new team, I'd sit down and say, here's how I operate. Here's what I'm looking for. Here are expectations. How do you operate? How do we make this work? How do we handle things when they don't go the way we want them to? And I think it's the same thing when you transition. Don't be afraid to have those conversations and sit down and say, hey, Joshua, like, I am now moving into this role and that's going to shift the dynamic for us. Like, don't hide it in the shadows, call it out and talk about it and say, what does that bring up for you? I still want to achieve this, that, and the other. And I still want to like honor that we have a relationship. We have to get these things done. How can we work together to make that happen? Instead of diving in headlong, taking it all on yourself, which can add to the loneliness, and hoping that what you're doing is working for you and the other person without ever talking to the other person. You raised something that I think we've thought about this a lot from the person experiencing the loneliness. And you just sharing that brought up for me the instances when what do you do when you're the leader and someone comes to you about their loneliness and about navigating this? And one thing you just mentioned that really, I've had this experience. I've been on the receiving end of this with managers that I reported to in previous roles. And I always really appreciated when I would go in, close the door, sit down and say, I need to talk. And then after talking, they go, do you want me to do I need to pull in HR? Do you just want me to talk? Do you just want to talk about possible solutions? What do you need from me in this instance to support you best?
Mhm.
Because sometimes it is just having a bad day. I didn't sleep well. The baby was crying and screaming all night. Then I had a flat tire on the way to work. And then I get here and someone just, lays it out on me because I'm late, even, and sometimes it's just one bad day. But when it's not just one bad day, and you
Hmm.
don't just need to vent, having someone who can receive what you are sharing with them and then ask you, how can I best support you?
That I think already breaks down a lot of walls of that loneliness, right? Someone going exactly what you said. How do I show up for you today? Like, what do you need? Like, what again, a lot of people just have that bad day and they're going to get it out of their system, and tomorrow is guaranteed to be different because in what world does the exact same thing happen 2 days in a row, right? And that's just going to happen. But again, there is power in the question, what can I do for you? How can I show up for you? And letting them navigate and work through that question. Sometimes the question is the answer, right? I just needed to know someone wanted to help. That I just needed to know that there was some avenue, some pathway where someone was just like, "Hey, I hear you, and I will do my best in whatever capacity I have and whatever capacity you want to give me the power to help in to support you."
I think time is one of the most precious things we can spend with people because you can't get it back. And
Mm.
to spend it with someone truly engaged, locked in with them in a sense of like, I'm here to support you and have a meaningful conversation, you can't buy that. You can't put a price tag on that. You can never get that time back. And you just never know the power. I've had people years later where I was just walking past their cubicle and I noticed that they were like hanging their head or seemed frustrated. And I just stopped by and say, "Hey, is everything okay? Do you need to talk?" They didn't even take me up on it. But years later, they'd say, "You don't know how much that meant." And I didn't.
To a lot of leaders that especially are strong in their role or they have a really high EQ. Like they willing to ask that question and not hope anyone calls their bluff, right? Like where, hey, like if is there something you need? Like, hey, I'm not just asking because like the kitten poster on my wall says that I need to ask people how they're doing today. Like, hey, like I saw you looked a little down. I just let me know if there's anything, right? Like, how can I show up and best support you? How can I, what you need? What you need? Yeah, can I go grab you something? Like like, there's been a scenario, one of the coolest moments that I had just because in, like, a micro moment was we there was cupcakes and for, like, the anniversaries and birthdays, and I was walking by somebody's desk, and I could tell they were not having it that day, right? And I was just like, "What's going on?" And they kinda talked a little bit about the situation, and I was just like, "Okay, man, that really sucks." And I was just like, "How about you take a step back? Like, we've got some stuff in the kitchen there, just kinda celebrate the birthdays, like, take a moment, take a brain break." And they're like, "I really wanna do that, and I would love one of those, but I actually have to jump into another meeting right now." And I was just like, "Let me go grab you one. Let me grab you one. I'll bring it back. Don't even worry. You don't even have to leave your desk." You know, that was not an incredible sacrifice on my part, and probably the baseline of human decency. But just being able to say, hey, like, one, I notice, right? Like you being clearly frustrated. I did not see that and go, and then yeah, that's normal. We're okay. And just keep walking by, and then to say, like, hey, you really want something, you're not able to get it because of the expectation on you. So come on, let me go do something nice for you, right? Because I think a lot of time we talk about that loneliness. I think a lot of time we feel like because of the expected burden on us that we can't have that moment of peace. We can't have that moment of connection. So just to be able to go, hey, I get it. We got meetings. We all got meetings. I got meetings I can't get out of. So let me take care of it. Right. Again, that's not a moment that anyone deserves a medal in, but it just goes to show that taking the time to care carries weight. Like you will do so much for someone The small moments, this keeps coming back in my life recently, this expression. The big moments are built in the small moments, right? I believe if you show up in the small moments for people continuously, in those big moments, those real crises, right? Crises, those real moments of like character defining moments, those small ones have given you the right to be a part of it. You earn the big moments through the small moments.
Absolutely. And it's so funny you bring that up. Just took my final for IO Psych, my master's class. And a large portion of the study guide was on affective commitment of how do I feel about this organization? And that is one of the strongest predictors of turnover. Because if that's strong, I'm good. But if it's low, I'm not happy. Those just taking those little steps and doing those little things, yeah, they mean a lot. They may feel like nothing, but to be on the receiving end of that and just know somebody thought of me, somebody helped me. I am not alone.
Not alone. I don't think we get to choose what is a big or small moment for somebody. I
Yeah.
think our responsibility is only to show up in that moment, and then how we just make sure we show up.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us together as we explored this topic. If you would like to connect with us, you can find our LinkedIn contact information in the podcast episode notes. We would love to hear from you. Let us know if there's something in particular that resonated with you from this episode, or if there are particular topics that you would like us to cover in the future. Finally, if you found this information valuable, please go ahead and give us a follow. And if you know anyone else who you think would benefit from this information, please share the link with them. Thank you again, and take care.